there was a very, the cancer studies that are there between the two regions, one of the most interesting findings that they had was that Northern Ireland is non-fluoridated, so the baby's drinking infant formula. They're drinking the same formula as we have in Ireland, but it's made with tap water that doesn't have fluoride in it. The increase in chronic lymphoblastic leukemia in the south of Ireland was coming in at about 2.7% per annum of an increase every year. And there was no increase in 20 years in Northern Ireland. None. No increase. And you're kind of going, well, what could be the difference between exposures between the two populations? Why is this happening? Because over 20 years, that's nearly 70% higher rates, prevalence rates of that particular type of leukemia, which is the most common form of leukemia in the south of Ireland, and no increase at all in Northern Ireland. And it's not just cancer. The studies that have been done on morbidity or mortality from chronic diseases between the two regions are mind-blowing. The Institute of Public Health published a report in 2001 where they looked at inequalities in mortality between the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland. And you have to understand that the north of Ireland was going through what was then, you still had the conflict, you had a population that had survived the conflict in Northern Ireland, a very stressful period, very high rates of unemployment and social inequality. Ireland was much better off than the north of Ireland. They didn't have the stress levels that they had to deal with up in Northern Ireland. And yet the mortality, the death rate from diabetes in Ireland was 400% higher than in Northern Ireland. The death rates from endocrine and nutritional and metabolic diseases was 350% higher in the south of Ireland. The death rate from sudden infant death syndrome was 300% higher in the south of Ireland than in Northern Ireland. The death rate from rheumatoid arthritis was 227% higher than the north of Ireland. And diseases of the musculoskeletal system, 228%. And then diseases of the blood, 220%. So like those key areas there that they look at, diabetes is kidney function. If your kidneys aren't working properly, you'll have higher levels of fluoride in your blood, it's going to be more toxic. Endocrine, so it's how it's affecting the thyroid and other endocrine functions, but they now know that the bone itself, skeleton, is an endocrine organ. And one of the key things about it is that bone cells, which are called osteoblasts, produce a hormone called osteocalcin. And one factor that has been found to be the single most important factor with regard to triggering osteocalcin has been fluoride. So as the dose or exposure to fluoride increases, the level of osteocalcin expression increases. And osteocalcin is an endocrine protein. So in studies in China, they found that when urine levels of fluoride in adolescent boys exceeded 0.6 milligrams per liter, you had altered expression of osteocalcin occurring. And when urine levels exceeded 0.3 milligrams, you had altered expression of a protein called calcitonin, which is produced in the thyroid gland. Calcitonin is associated with thyroid disorders, for example. Osteocalcin is associated with cardiovascular disease. It causes calcification of your arteries, increases the risk of stroke, because you get plaque formation breaking off and you get a heart attack. Osteocalcin is involved in altering testosterone in men. It's involved in precocious puberty in girls. It's involved in neurological disorders in the brain if you have too much of it. It causes anxiety, depressive disorders.
Are China fluoridated? Do they fluoridate their water supply? I've read they've done a lot of studies though on the issue of fluoridation. Have they
well, on fluoride they have. But I mean, when I met one of the leading professors from China in 2013 when I was invited to an international fluoride conference that was being held in the Medical University of Tehran. And there was a bunch of academics from China there, professors with some of their leading scholars. And I was presenting a paper on the toxicity of fluoride to the lungs, and he approached me afterwards and he said, like, how many have you got working in your department, in your university? And I said, I don't have a university. I don't have anybody working with me. He was going, how are you doing it? Like, how are you managing to fund the work that you're doing, to put so much time and effort into learning the body of knowledge that you've learned at the moment? And I said, I'm just doing it. I mean, this is my office. Like, I work next to my home, and it's on a shoestring budget, funded entirely by myself. And in his context, he would have 70 researchers working with him in an area out there in China. In India, they would have entire university departments also researching fluoride. But in Ireland, there's none. 2 years ago, I have a folder there that I could wallpaper the house with in terms of responses from the government to communications I sent into them. This was the first study I did. The key factor with this is that, like, the main reason that they decided not to pay any attention to it was because they said the studies that I looked at in terms of animal studies were not relevant to humans, because the animals, the rats, were getting higher doses of fluoride in their drinking water. Now, they've been using rodents and rats for dental fluorosis studies because they're comparable to humans for the last 40 years. There has been thousands of studies done on it. Every researcher in the field knows that rodents need higher doses of fluoride to have the same blood levels of a human, because they excrete it differently. So rats need about 10 to 20 times more fluoride in their water supply to get the same level that a human would get from drinking fluoridated tap water in Ireland. But at the same blood levels, it has the same effect on teeth. So the effect on the teeth of the rats is the same as in humans at the same blood levels.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with the fluoride concentration in the water. It's got to do with the fluoride level in their blood. And the same effect that it has on teeth in terms of dental fluorosis in rats at those blood levels that cause dental fluorosis, it has profound implications with regards to neurotoxicity on the brain of rats. Profound. So what they found in animal studies is that what the blood levels that cause dental fluorosis in rats, which are the same blood levels that cause dental fluorosis in humans, causes profound neurological disorders in rats, and no one's done any studies on humans. But they're still quite happy to use rats as a biomarker for fluorosis in humans. And when I addressed these studies in this original report, the response of the expert body, and it was Joe Mullins, who's a dentist, was that these aren't relevant to humans because rats get higher levels of fluoride in their water. He didn't even understand the pharmacokinetics of fluoride with rats. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah. What were the main findings on that report? That you said that to...
I sent that to... I went and got 60 copies of this published, and I sent it to every government minister and every head of the state department that would have anything to do with protecting public health, from the EPA to the HSE to the Food Safety Authority and everybody else, the WHO, everybody else. Everything in that is still relevant, completely relevant. I wrote a response to the government and criticizing a rebuttal to their review of this, and they never responded to it. I then wrote this study, which was the public health examination of disease and mortality in relation to water fluoridation in Ireland, and went through all of these factors, like as to why were all of these diseases so much more prevalent, and not just those, but cancer rates so much prevalent in the south of Ireland and the north of Ireland. And their response is, water fluoridation has nothing to do with cancer. But the University of Tokyo in 2001 published a study that looked at cancer rates in the United States in fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries, and they published their results in a peer-reviewed epidemiological journal and found that 63% of all cancers in the United States were positively associated with water fluoridation. 63%. Do you think they ever did a study in Ireland to look at the north and south of Ireland?
They said that they're conducting one, or they've created some body on fluoride.
They have an expert body. You put people on a panel and call them an expert, and everyone will go, oh, they're an expert, they know what to do. I've never been asked anywhere by anybody to meet with the expert body. Like when I produced this report, you thought they might ask me to come in and talk about it with them. They never invited me. When I sent it to the EPA, they never asked me. Nobody has ever asked me to basically share some of the knowledge that I've gained with them. When I wrote to the Food Safety Authority and the HSE about the Chief Medical Officer about the very high levels of fluoride that were found in tea products all over the world, and the fact that public health authorities in other countries where they drank tea were saying our population are being chronically exposed to fluoride in tea, but it could be much worse if the water was fluoridated. When I gave those papers to the agencies in Ireland and said, well, what's the fluoride level in tea in Ireland? They didn't know. And when I asked them to do the studies, they said we'd get around to them, and 3 years later they didn't do the studies. So I went ahead on my own behalf and tested 54 tea products, black tea products that are for sale in Ireland. 54. That's literally everyone you can imagine. I never realized there were so many tea products in Ireland. And not one of the tea products, not one of them complied with EU food law. Not one of them. They all had fluoride levels higher than the maximum that's allowed for drinking water. And there are people in Ireland who drink more tea than drinking water, especially the older, elderly community. You had levels of fluoride in tea here that basically, let's see, what was the highest that I got in this? 6.1 milligrams per liter. Like, so drinking 3 cups of tea in a day or 2 mugs, you were getting 6 milligrams of fluoride just from the tea. Nothing else. Not including toothpaste, food, or how you cooked your food, or everything else. So the Food Safety Authority before that, in the one study that they ever did in fluoride levels of foods in Ireland, had given a figure of less than 0.5 for tea in Ireland. When I wrote to them at the time and said, what tea did you test? How many samples did you test? I got a response from someone in the Food Safety Authority saying, well, we didn't do it, actually it was UCC did it, it was the Dental Health University in UCC that did it. And I said, well, what were they doing it for? And what product did it test? Where's the chain of custody? I want to see the chain of custody for that sample. What was the name of it? Where did it come from? Was it loose tea, black tea, green tea, white tea? What type of tea was it? How many samples were taken? It was 1 tea bag. 1 tea bag, I was told. And they didn't know the brand, they didn't know the type of tea. So they based the fluoride intake of tea based on a single tea bag. This is what I was told at the time, right? I tested 54 in triplicate to get these results, like. And what they show was that the fluoride levels are vastly higher than what were reported. But importantly, they're the same or similar to what are in the UK, because similar studies have been done in the UK. So my data is comparable with what's been published all over the world. But it's not comparable to the Food Safety Authority of Ireland on their single sample of a single tea bag that no one knows what's tested. So there's something seriously amiss here in regards to the due diligence that's going on with regard to fluoride. And I did that at the time, this study, and I had colleagues in Canada and the United States and New Zealand come on board to help me, professors of one who was a member of the National Academy of Sciences, Hardy Limebank. He's 2 PhDs, and he's a dentist, but he's against water fluoridation. A professor of biochemistry from another university and a medical doctor from New Zealand, to add weight to the study that, look, it's not just me, these people have reviewed it as well, and then it was sent for peer review to the journal, external reviewers, and published. Probably a year's work in total just to produce a paper, because I had about 100 drafts of this, and I sent it to one journal, and they got back to me and said our readers wouldn't be interested in this. Then I sent it to this journal, and they published it. When I did the New Zealand study, I sent it to the New Zealand Medical Journal, because they'd never tested tea in New Zealand for 50 years, since 1948. And we addressed in this study in huge detail, it's much bigger than the other one because there's over 300 references in it, and there's a huge discussion in all of the studies internationally on how fluoride is associated with chronic pain. Chronic pain affects over about 1 million people in Ireland. And the New Zealand Medical Journal got back and said, oh, we don't think our readers would be interested in that. And you go, well, what do you mean? Like 80% of adults in New Zealand drink tea, and you're saying medical doctors in New Zealand aren't interested to find out the fact that the patients that they're seeing with chronic pain disorders may be related to the fact that they're suffering from fluoride poisoning? And they wouldn't respond. So we sent it to another journal, and this journal published it after 6 months of peer review. So like,
are they peer reviewed?
They're peer reviewed, yeah. They're an international. They're on PubMed. So if you go into PubMed, which is the international library, a medical library that the United States use for peer reviewed published studies, they're listed in there. But when I did the work, like Leo Varadkar or Karen Taoiseach, when he was Minister for Health, like his private secretary wrote to me and said, we're really not going to pay any heed to you unless you publish your results in a peer-reviewed journal. So I published it in a peer-reviewed journal and I sent it into them. I got no response. The study in Ireland shows that the population in Ireland is chronically poisoned by fluoride from drinking tea. And under no circumstances should we be putting it into the water supply. We should be reducing the fluoride level in tea products in Ireland, putting a mandatory limit on what the fluoride level should be on tea, as they have for bottled water and mineral water. There should be warnings on packages of teas in Ireland saying, do not drink when pregnant, do not give to children, do not drink more than 5 cups a day, like they have, say, with alcohol promotion, like that you limit your intake. There is absolutely no warnings whatsoever for individuals. And I've known lots of people who are chronic tea drinkers, all of them suffering from chronic musculoskeletal disorders, arthritic disease, chronic pain disorders. And once they've changed their tea, because I've managed to find one tea since I did this, that drinking 10 mugs of it would be the same as drinking 1 mug of the most popular teas sold in Ireland. So you could drink 10 times as much and had the same as drinking a single cup of the other ones. And when they switched to that tea, within weeks their conditions improved. Within weeks. So that's the issue of fluoride in tea in Ireland. We always had it, but it changed in Ireland in the 1960s. And it changed because our grandparents' generation drank tea from Sri Lanka, which is the single tea that I found that has the very low level of fluoride, and Asram in India, which also has the lowest of all of these that I tested, fluoride level. And they switched to Kenyan teas, and it's the Kenyan teas are the highest. So all of the main brands of tea in Ireland are over 85% sourced from Kenya, and they come from the East Rift Valley in Kenya, and the East Rift Valley in Kenya, to get you back to the medical doctors training who are going to East Africa, is an area that suffers from chronic endemic fluoride poisoning because the soil fluoride levels are so high, the drinking water levels are so high, everything they grow in that country has high fluoride levels in it if it's a certain type of plant, leafy plant like kale or spinach or tea in this instance. So they have a massive public health problem with that, and all our tea since the 1960s in Ireland has literally been coming from Kenya, and nobody tested it. And at the same time, we switched our tea source, which was actually occurred by a government agency. It was a government agency, semi-state body set up by the government after the Second World War, the Irish Tea Company, who were responsible for importing tea to Ireland. They were backed by state loans, and that company, do you know what that company ended up as? Anglo-Irish Bank. The financial wing of Irish Tea, which was disbanded by the EU in the 1980s, became Anglo-Irish Bank. And the key people who were involved in the financial management of the Irish Tea Company were the key people who were involved in Anglo-Irish Bank. So fluoride has come back to harm us in more ways than one. So they've crippled the country physically by importing this tea, and they've crippled the company economically because of the way they manage the bank. But so that's what changed. And at the same time that we changed our tea, we introduced fluoride into the water supply.
So are those studies without the actual water fluoridation taken into account? They're just fluoride from tea?
Yeah, no, I did both. So I measured the fluoride levels in the tea released into the infusion if you use tap water and if you use deionized water.
Okay, yeah.
So you can see the differences that are there. Yeah. And I did the same with the New Zealand one. The New Zealand one, they're not as bad as us because most of their tea isn't coming from Kenya. Okay. the highest level in New Zealand was half the strength of the one in Ireland, and we drink 4 times more tea than they do in New Zealand. We drink about 12 times more tea than they do in the United States. And the United States reduced the level of fluoride in drinking water to a maximum of 0.7 in 2013-14 because of the risk of exposure from other sources in the United States. That's toothpaste and mouthwash and medicines and everything else. So they reduced it to 0.7. A single cup of tea in Ireland would be about the same as the dietary intake that an American would have. Americans don't drink tea really, they drink coffee. The intake is way lower, apart from certain states where it's iced tea that they would be drinking. But given the amount of tea we consume in Ireland, there's absolutely no question whatsoever, unless your brain has been completely fluoride riddled to the stage that you have no cognitive thinking whatsoever left, that we should have fluoride in our water supply in Ireland. All right.
It's crazy. What kind so do you think that at the highest levels of government there's a suppression of all studies?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, they're not funding them in Ireland. I'm a thorn in their side because I'm managing to get these studies out into the peer-reviewed literature that are now there as a document. I'm leaving a paper trail. I have the paper trail with politicians that's been going on for 6 years of just blanket incompetence on their behalf, and it's not our fault, it's someone else's fault. It's the exact same that happened with the child abuse in Ireland. It's the exact same that happened with every other major medical or spiritual or moral crisis that we've had in this country in the last 60 years. They won't address it until the public wake up to it, and the public really need to wake up to this pretty quick.
And how do you see that happening? Because
well, it's happening by social media. It's happening nearly every day that I go out. I talk to somebody. If I see a young mother with a baby, I'll warn her not to give that child formula milk made with fluoridated tap water. I'll explain it to her in as polite a fashion as I can. If I see an elderly person who's arthritic or has any complaints like that, I'll ask them what tea do they drink and would they consider switching their tea. I'll tell them about the dangers of fluoride that are there because nobody's telling them about them. I mean, I have to end on this now because I've other commitments I've got to go to, but what was really important in the New Zealand study is that I address other sources of fluoride, right? So in Ireland we're getting it from our Guinness or Murphy's or Beamish or any other beer that's produced using the public water supply. Fluoride has been found to increase the toxicity of alcohol, ethanol on liver, and ethanol has been found to increase the toxicity of fluoride on liver. Fluoride has been found to increase the toxicity of BPA, which is a endocrine disruptive chemical that's involved in disorders of neurological disorders in kids. BPA has been found to increase the toxicity of fluoride and vice versa. Fluoride has been found to increase the toxicity of lead. Lead has been found to increase the neurotoxicity of fluoride. Fluoride has been found to increase the toxicity of aluminium. The aluminium levels in the tea samples were 30 times the drinking water standard in Ireland. I mean, they're getting massive doses of aluminium, massive doses of fluoride. We're wondering where the rates of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and everything else are happening in this country, how people are getting it. People are getting dementia in Ireland in their 50s now, and they're wondering why. The pesticides that are now associated with autism and ADHD, there's been 2 pesticides that have been identified in studies that are associated with a strong association with autistic spectrum disorders and other neurological disorders. Both those pesticides have been found that in the presence of fluoride in water, their toxicity increases by over 100%. And one of the pesticides that they addressed that with too, the EU Food Safety Authority, in a study published 2 years ago, looking at pesticide exposures in Europe, found that the highest rates of exposure to that pesticides in the European Union was among Irish adults, because of our use of that pesticide in agriculture today. And we're the only country that has fluoride in our water supply.